Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to this session of Maxims of Fiqh. Today, inshallah, we will be talking about the general maxims that fall under the grand maxim, difficulty brings ease. And the first maxim that we will discuss is إِذَا ضَاقَ الْأَمْرُ اتَّسَعَ. When the matter is restrained, it becomes easy and it becomes wider. This maxim means that whenever there is a difficulty added to the act itself, that difficulty causes the matter to become easy and causes for a concession to come until that difficulty is gone, so the act would go back to the norm. Allah Azza wa Jal says in the Quran, فَمَنِ اضْطُرَّ فِي مَخْمَصَةٍ غَيْرَ مُتَجَانِفٍ لِإِثْمٍ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. If you are coerced in a famine to eat from the dead carrion, then there is no sin, there is no blame on you. So that is an example. Why? Because there was a necessary thing that is added and made the matter difficult. Usually you have lots of options to eat from, and that's when you cannot eat the dead meat. You cannot eat from the pork because you have other options. But now you are in a famine, there is no other option. So the matter is restrained. And that's when Allah Azza wa Jal says, you can eat from it. So, إِذَا ضَاقَ الْأَمْرُ اتَّسَعَ. That's one of the examples for this maxim. Another example would be a woman who wants to marry and she doesn't have a wali. Now, in regular circumstances, she could assign any of her relatives as a wali. And there is a stage where everyone has a level in the guardianship. But she is not within her family, she is abroad and she cannot go back. She has been there, she lived there, so there is no wali for her. Do we tell her you cannot marry at all? No. In her case, there is a wali and she can assign someone to act on behalf of her as her wali. Why? Because again, when the matter is restrained, it becomes wide and it becomes easy. The next maxim that we have as a general maxim is necessity permits prohibition. الضرورة تبيح ما كان محظورا, or necessities permit prohibitions. Now this is a general maxim, and some scholars actually they put that maxim near the grand maxim, the hard is to be removed. Yet here we're talking about concessions, and that's why this maxim should fall underneath the grand maxim. Types of concessions that are allowed due to necessity fall under one of three categories. The first category, that they change the ruling as long as the necessity is present, which means that in principle it is haram, but then it becomes halal. Why? Due to necessity. Then there is another type that remains the ruling, which is prohibited, but the act is allowed. And then there is an act that is prohibited whatsoever, even if there is a necessity. For instance, if you were threatened that you will die unless you kill someone else, that's a necessity, but it does not allow you to kill someone else. While if there is a famine and you need to eat, and you ate from the dead carrion, what's the ruling on eating the dead carrion? Some scholars said it becomes permissible. Others said no, it is still haram, but your act is allowed due to that necessity. So you don't eat more than your need. These are the types of concessions. The other maxim that falls under the grand maxim is what is permitted for necessity is limited to that necessity. ما أبيح لضرورة يقدر بقدرها. This is like a restriction of the previous maxim. الضرورات تبيح المحظورات. Necessities permit prohibitions. It's not absolute. There is a restriction for that maxim. And that restriction is that the permissibility is measured by the necessity. So the action due to necessity does not go beyond the need. For instance, exposing the awrah is not permissible. No one can look in between your navel and knee. except for your wife or what your right hand possesses. However, if you have an injury in your private part, in the area between your navel and knee, and you went to the doctor, he wants to treat you, you are allowed to expose to him what is sufficient for him to make the treatment. You're not allowed to go naked totally. Why? Because what is necessary here is to see that area where he needs to treat. That's all. So you don't go beyond the need. The same thing what scholars said about eating when there is a famine, there is a hunger, and you need to eat. Do you eat full or you eat what suffices you to survive? Another example, when the enemy takes shields from Muslims and they cannot be attacked without attacking some of the Muslims. Can we attack the Muslims? Yes, but still that act is prohibited and the intention is to go against the enemy. If the Muslims were hit in the middle, that is permissible. The other maxim, what is permitted for a reason becomes prohibited again when that reason is removed. Usually, if the ruling is prohibition and then it became permissibility due to the necessity. Once that necessity is gone, then the ruling goes back to prohibition. For instance, men are not allowed to wear silk. We're talking about the natural silk. They're not allowed to wear silk, harir. Yet, if someone has rash on his skin and the doctor told him you need to wear only silk, that is permissible. If the rash is gone, can he still keep wearing silk? No, because now the necessity is removed. The cause for that necessity is removed. So you cannot keep wearing silk. The next maxim is that need takes the ruling and the position of necessity. We have in our religion, we have necessities, and scholars agreed on that the necessity is changing the ruling from prohibition to permissibility. But then we have cases where it's not needed, it's not necessary, but it is needed. Like what? Electricity, for instance. Can people live without electricity? Yeah, it's not a matter of life or death. But imagine the life without electricity. It will be very, very difficult. Yeah, people did live without electricity 500 years ago, 200, but how that was their life? Now we are used to that. It's not a matter of life or death, but it's a very difficult situation. So the loss of electricity is measured as a necessity, although it is a need, it is not a necessity. Then we have the accessories, the complementaries. Those are additional things. What do they take? They take the ruling, the normal ruling, because we don't change the ruling from complementary to necessary or needed. So what is needed takes the ruling of what is necessary. Then another maxim we have that goes under the grand maxim is necessity does not annul the right of others. And this is very important maxim. And it is like an exception from the major maxim that whenever there is a necessity, the things that are prohibited become permissible. An example for this would be if you want to eat and there is nothing but the food of your friend. That's the right of your friend. He is not in a necessity like you are. So you took his food without his permission. Otherwise you will die. Do you need his permission? No, you don't need his permission. But if he asked you for the price, do you have to pay him? Yes, you have to pay him. Why? Because necessity does not annul the right of others. You are permitted to do the act due to necessity, but that does not remove the liability, the financial liability. Another example would be if there is a boat and that boat became very heavy. People on the boat are more than what is normal, and they notice that if they keep going like that, they might sink. There is lots of luggage. Can they throw some of the luggage without knowing who it is belonging to? They can, otherwise they will all die. So here they did that due to necessity. But what about the person who said, this is my luggage and it cost me $1,000. We tell him, this is the $1,000, you deserve it, we did the act based on our necessity, and that necessity does not annul your right. Now, another example would be if an animal attacked you, your neighbor's animal, it did attack you, and you tried to defend yourself, so you killed that animal. That animal happened to be a she-camel. The she-camel might cost $1,000, and your neighbor came to you and told you, you killed my she-camel. You could have run away, and you told him, I was defending myself. That is your right. You are absolutely right. You defended yourself. But what about the she-camel that is dead now? Don't you have to pay the money? Some scholars say you were allowed to defend yourself and you did a permissible act, so there is no consequence for that. This is the conclusion of this session, and I will see you inshallah in the next half of this subject, the maxims of fiqh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.